All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Brooklyn. I hope everybody's doing well. I'm Stephanie Anderson, your moderator for this amazing panel, Soul of the City. I'm going to introduce our panelists in the moment, but I wanted to start this afternoon with a land acknowledgement, because particularly for this panel, which is so focused on cities and their many souls, it is important to begin our discussion with an acknowledgement of where we all are in space and time right now. So myself, all three of your panelists today, and the administration of this festival are all coming to you from different places in what we now call Brooklyn, which is the traditional land of the Muncie Lenape people and the Canarsie people. So I ask you to join us in respectfully acknowledging the Muncie Lenape and Canarsie people, past and present, who have cared and continue to care for this land we now occupy, and also in acknowledging the legacy of colonization leading us to and continuing to impact this moment right now. So for the next moment, whether you're here in Brooklyn with us or not, please just join us in silent acknowledgement. All right, so now that we've taken a moment to reflect on where we are, I invite you to learn more about who we are and who we have with us here today. So I'm going to introduce our three panelists, and then we're going to go ahead and start the discussion from there. I have some questions to get discussion started, but I am also really excited to incorporate any questions that any of you have. So please feel free to add them to the chat at any point throughout the conversation. I've got it open in another window and I'll be keeping an eye on it. And we'll also try to have some questions, some time at the end for some formal Q&A, but don't wait. If you've got a great question or you want some clarification on something one of the panelists says, please feel free to put it here. I'm a public librarian by training. I've done a lot of toddler story times in my day. I don't mind being interrupted. So feel free to ask those great questions as they occur to you. We're really excited to hear from you. All right, so who's here today? Who's all here? We've got former U.S. Army Captain Matt Gallagher. He's the author of the novel Youngblood, a finalist for the 2016 Dayton Literary Peace Prize. He is most recently the author of Empire City, and his work has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Esquire, the Paris Review Daily, and Wired, among other places. He's also the author of the Iraq memoir Kaboom and co-editor of and contributor to the short fiction collection Fire and Forget, Short Stories from the Long War. In 2015, Gallagher was featured in Vanity Fair as one of the voices of a new generation of American war literature. He lives with his wife and son in Brooklyn and works as a writing instructor at Words After War, a literary nonprofit devoted to bringing veterans and civilians together to study conflict literature. Matt, can you wave and smile for the crowd at home?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Matt. We also have N.K. Jemisin, most recently the author of The City We Became. She is the first author in history to win 3 consecutive Best Novel Hugo Awards, all for her Broken Earth trilogy. Her work has also won the Nebula, the Locus, and the Goodreads Choice Awards. She has been a reviewer for the New York Times Book Review and an instructor for the Clarion and Clarion West writing workshops. In her spare time, she's a gardener and a gamer, and she is also single-handedly responsible for saving the world from King Ozymandias, her dangerously intelligent ginger cat, and his phenomenally destructive sidekick Magpie, and I have it on good authority that she's keeping an eye on them as we speak. So if Nora suddenly dashes out of the panel, you know where she's went. Hi, Nora. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Ozzy is right here next to me.
Oh, good.
But you have to say it like this. It's King Ozymandias. You have to have the invisible.
Oh, I'm sorry. King Ozymandias. I do apologize, and I beg your pardon. All right, and our third panelist is Tochi Onyebuchi, who is the author of the young adult novel Beast Made of Night, which won the Ilube Nommo Award for Best Speculative Fiction Novel by an African, its sequel, Crown of Thunder, and also War Girls. He holds a BA from Yale, an MFA in screenwriting from the New York University Tisch School of the Arts, a master's degree in economic law from Sciences Po, and please correct that, Tochi, if I said that wrong, and a JD from Columbia Law School. His fiction has appeared in Panverse 3, Asimov's Science Fiction, Obsidian, Omanana Magazine, Uncanny, and Lightspeed. His nonfiction has appeared in Tor.com, Nowhere Magazine, the Oxford University Press blog, and the Harvard Journal of African American Public Policy, among other places. And Riot Baby, his latest book, is his adult fiction debut. Tochi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, I'm so glad to have all three of you on this panel today to talk about Soul of the City. So let's get started with an easy question. So all three of your most recent books center on cities, past, present, or future, and spend some or most of their pages in New York City or something very close to New York City, let's say. So the question is, and Tochi, I apologize because we are not going to talk about the LA parts of your book. You can go to the LA Times Book Festival to talk about the LA parts of your book. We'll mainly be talking about New York City.
Wow.
The East Coast, West Coast beef is real.
I know,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
sorry. My East Coast bias is very, very real. So the question is, what is the best city in the world and why is it New York City? No, I'm sorry. No, that's not the question. The question is, what interests you about cities and what made you want to write about a city and set a city at the heart of your book?
Well, since my last name starts alphabetically, I guess.
I was trying to figure out, like, how are we supposed to figure this out? Okay.
For me, Empire City is my second novel, and I was looking for a way in to kind of talk about modern conflict here on the home front. And from the get-go, as I was figuring out ways to do that, to maybe bring readers to these issues of war and peace that otherwise might not engage with them, a city just kind of made sense. And New York City or Empire City made sense because it's a place where all layers of American society and class clash together, right, and are forced to interact on a day-to-day, block-to-block level that you're not necessarily going to see elsewhere, right? And so much that's always really fascinated me, those layers of class and society coming together in the military, right? And working together in a way that they might not otherwise back here in the States, right? In my scout platoon, two best friends, one was a Haitian immigrants, the other was a good old boy from country Oklahoma. Where else would they have encountered each other in everyday life? But the U.S. Army. I was just kind of always fascinated with that. So when I was looking for a setting for this novel, it really wasn't a question. It always had to be New York and a darker modern version of New York to tell the story that I wanted to do, which was to explore all these issues from the bottom up in a place where all these things are happening together and at once.
Tochi, you want to do rock, paper, scissors?
Yeah.
How are we going to do this?
I'll jump in. I'll jump in.
Good. Okay.
No, so when I was conceptualizing Riot Baby, a part of me, in the beginning, wondered about potentially setting the whole thing in LA, particularly because of the whole history of uprisings there and a lot of the points that I wanted to make about the continuity of police brutality and the resistance against it could be made by setting a story entirely in LA over the decades. But I wanted to write about a place that I knew and that I knew intimately. And so the year after I graduated law school, I lived in Harlem. It was right on 152nd Street in Sugar Hill, and I was titanically broke. So it was a very interesting but very meaningful year in my life because I was working with the Civil Rights Division of the Attorney General's office. And I got to know that little corner of New York very, very, very well. That the ABCD lines stop at, or they have a stop at 145th Street. There's a bodega right there that I would always get a bacon, egg, and cheese from on my way to work. And so I wanted to write about a place that I knew intimately, but I also wanted to write about a very interesting time in New York that sort of exists in that liminal space between history and present. And that's like New York in the early to mid 2000s. And music for me was a very big inspiration with regards to the story. For the LA parts, I listened to a lot of West Coast rap over the course of the generations. But one of the appeals of writing about New York City in the 2000s is that it meant I listened to a lot of Dipset. And so there's a lot of really wonderful and formative, rap that came out of that time. And very, very, very quickly, I got put in the mind state that I felt I needed to be in to be comfortable to write about that place at that time. So part of it was personal exigency, but also I think another part of it, and this was a byproduct and a benefit of shifting the story from South Central to Harlem, was that not only did you get this temporal continuity of, white supremacy as it exists in the carceral state and in the police surveillance state, but you had this geographic continuity. It's not just South Central, it's also on the East Coast as well. It's everywhere in this country. And so that's one of the, those are a couple of the reasons why I set such a big chunk of the story in the city. But also too, an extension of that is that like Rikers is like New York's, it's a city jail. Like it's not a county jail, it's not a state facility, it's a New York City jail. And that was a point that I really wanted to ram home as well, is that similar to what Matt was talking about these different sort of populations being brought together in this specific situation, you have in many, many, many ways a similar thing happening behind bars, where all these people from all these different parts of the country, or through various circumstances, are brought together under these very intense and traumatic circumstances. And that was another thing that I wanted to get at as well, the ways in which a place like a city can throw people together in somewhat traumatic situations, but that we don't necessarily see too much of in contemporary fiction.
In my case, I just wanted to write about New York. I've always kind of had an interest in doing city-based fantasy, about the magic that's sort of inherent in cities. I think anybody that's lived in a city, even a moderately sized city, has noticed that the air is a little different sometimes. The sunlight falls at a different angle, maybe because you're up on like a 50-story tall building. But at the end of the day, there is something sort of unique about being in any large city, and New York in particular seems to have a lot of that urban magic. And so that was really it. I've written several stories about New York, New Orleans, a couple of other cities that I've lived in. But I wanted to expand on a short story that I wrote back in some year, in which it was called The City We Became. I'm sorry, The City Born Great. Which I wrote sort of about New York awakening, and then I decided to kind of pursue it from there. What has been sort of weirdly happening, though, I intended for this to be a palate cleanser after the Broken Earth series. I thought that this would be a nice, lighthearted way to have fun after the dreary darkness of writing about, the post-apocalypse for years. And surprise, because I'm writing about New York City, I inevitably have to write about things like the NYPD. And, because my characters are people of color, and people of color here spend a lot of time talking and worrying and stressing about the systems that harmfully affect their lives. So I inevitably kind of had to write about gentrification and deed theft and all these other things. And my lighthearted book slowly started to feel entirely not lighthearted at all. But it is what it is. That's some of the city magic, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, if I could build on what you're saying here, Nora, one of the other things I wanted to ask about is, I think, an idea that I really saw through all three of your most recent books, as I was reading them sort of in conversation with each other, is you're all talking about the way cities have their own energy that's like separate from the people, the people you meet, but the city itself often seems to have its own energy, and can actually act on people. People act differently in cities, perhaps. But then also, all of you explore the ways in which individual people change cities or can change cities, either because they have superpowers or because they become something other than human, or because they're just humans. They might just be normal humans too. So one idea I saw you all examining is this idea is like, is it the city do cities make people who they are, or do people make cities what they are. And that's something it seems like all of you were looking at a little bit. And I wonder if you can expand on that. Is it the cities that make the people, or the people that make the cities?
I'll jump in. It's recursive. The cities make the people make the cities. And it is an active consensus creation, I think. The nature of all the people that helped to pour their energy into New York City, that energy is still swirling around and continues to swirl around. And when newcomers come, they either have to blend in with it, or they spend a long time chafing against it. And the city will chafe right back. So they're welcome to try. And sometimes they have more power to impact and change the city than the average individual does, because one of the problems that we've been dealing with is people with a lot of privilege coming from very different backgrounds coming into the city and trying to change it. There's been an ongoing battle in my neighborhood. I live in BedStuy now. I was in Crown Heights. There's been an ongoing battle over, people who have this corner area where they practice their steel drums for it's kind of really intended for the Caribbean Day Parade that usually happens on Labor Day. But they do lots of black practice leading up to that so that they can sound amazing. And there's been a consistent problem with, like, there's this one white lady in the neighborhood who harasses the hell out of these people, calls the cops on them all the time. And this is a thing they've been doing for decades. So, but this is an ongoing problem that we have in New York, is people coming here who not only don't want to fit in or are kind of chafing in their attempt to fit in, but who are using what social power they have, and in some cases they have more social power than the people who've been here, to try and alter the city into, I don't know exactly what it is that they want to turn it into, the suburbs, I guess. So, this is an energy, and we're seeing this energy and the chafing of different energies and the friction that causes. That's part of city life too. That conflict and so forth is just, it's supposed to be there. But there's something changing about it. And that's, I think, what I wanted to explore.
I love that personal neighborhood story, because that tension, that conflict, it's right there for everyone to see, right? And confront. You can't shy away from it. All the veneer is stripped away, and these different agendas and ambitions and worldviews of how life in the city should be are forced to confront each other. I think anybody who's visited New York, certainly lived in New York, it's overwhelming, it's intoxicating, it's beautiful, it's devastating, all at once. All these things happen together. Certainly that was my experience moving here 11 years ago. The biggest city I'd lived in before coming here was Honolulu with the Army. And I did not find much aloha spirit when I first came. But I changed and I adapted, and a place that I thought I was going to flee soon after moving here, I really grew to love. And one of the main themes, I think, in Empire City is these three different main characters from different social classes and different backgrounds, all confronting the limitations of personal agency in the city, and also all finding great power in personal agency. The only one of them's born here in the city. The other two are from elsewhere. But I think that's something we all, particularly as young people, finding themselves and finding their belief systems in modern day America, are forced to confront. Nora was talking about systems earlier. Part of modern day American life is for all of us trying to figure out, where can I affect change for the better, and what are my personal limitations with that, right? Where is too much? Where do I need to find other people to find solace, to find empowerment with? So somewhere in there maybe was a coherent answer. I'll turn it over to Tochi now.
It was all coherent.
It was fantastically coherent. No, it's funny reading The City We Became. One person I couldn't stop thinking about was Robert Moses. And we're talking about feedback and feed forward loops with regards to people and cities. And I don't know anybody who did more to like reshape and intentionally segregate New York City than Robert Moses. Like the fact that overpasses are a certain height to prevent buses from certain boroughs to be able to make it to the beach because those buses had Black and brown kids on them. The fact that certain expressways were literally just raked through neighborhoods like claws. And like seeing it was very fascinating seeing that process almost sort of depicted in supernatural fashion in The City We Became. And like that was like immediately what I thought of. I was like, oh my goodness, that poor neighborhood that's now going to be completely devastated by this new expressway. But yeah, no, I think it's so I that makes me think that recursive process is happening on two levels, that there's a macrocosmic and microcosmic level. There's the macrocosmic, which is, a lot of it is people with resources, people in power doing things like, putting a huge park literally just in the middle of a place, and all the repercussions that has for the people who once lived there. People from outside buying up all this real estate as a place to park their money as opposed to a place that they can live in. Essentially, building the buildings higher and higher and higher, putting a premium on the sun, and on the ability
literally.
to see the sun. Yeah, like you literally have to
on
have
the air.
money. Exactly.
They sell air rights. You have to buy the air.
Which is like so people call Riot Baby dystopian. That's dystopian. You have to buy it. Like that is so there's like that process, and then there's the neighborhood level process, or the process that happens whenever you have interactions between certain neighborhoods and the NYPD, right? Like there's that level going on as well. And so there's this fascinating energy going on in cities. But like whenever I think of cities, I think of the most marginalized populations in them. And so there's that very sort of resistancy feel, but at the same time, it's a sort of community forged in fire. The fact of certain, immigrant traditions lasting in the face of all this, this gentrification and all these forces trying to act to homogenize this place. Like, that I think is very inspiring and dramatically compelling.
Yeah, it is. When you talk, I've thought about The Power Broker. I thought about rereading The Power Broker. I didn't really have time because I was reading all of your books, and that's a very long book. But there were certain passages of if anybody here hasn't read The Power Broker, it's the only 900-page book I'd recommend to literally everybody, because it really does speak to the ways in which one person can have such a profound effect on the city, but also the ways in which a city can push back against that person. But it's a really interesting observation. Well, to delve into some more of the issues you guys are talking about here, one thing I think is really interesting about all three of your books too, is that even though they all have these fantastical, or like you say, Tochi, I've seen all of your books described as dystopian, which I think is very funny, because if anything, between now and when each of them are published, they have become more and more true. Speaking as somebody who has thought about a lot in the last few weeks, it's almost as though you wrote certain things into being for which I don't
want to take the blame for that.
I guess.
Not my fault.
Yeah. You secreted this into being, and I don't appreciate it. But I do think it's interesting that these fantastical, these dystopian, these science fiction, whatever reviewer is reviewing the book, however they describe the book, you are using those tools to confront these very real life horrors of structural racism, white supremacy, gentrification, police violence, political corruption. So is this a deliberate choice? I think, and each of you, I think it feels more or less deliberate in the book, but for you, how deliberate is it to use these tools of fantasy and fiction, of dystopia, to look at these very real life problems that are in some ways more horrible than the terror elements or the fantastical elements of the book? Is that deliberate? How do you find it helps you to look at these things differently?
It's fascinating. A lot of Riot Baby is nonfiction, like if that makes sense. Like, the vast majority of the Rikers chapter, for instance, is literally stuff that I've witnessed, or that I've heard recounted to me, or that I know, people that I know have experienced or gone through. I think part of it is, and this is something I think we're seeing a lot more of now that there are more sort of children and grandchildren of empire writing speculative fiction, is this realization that the future happens to us first.
Mm.
And so that's why, whenever we see video of that Boston Dynamics robot dog, the first thing that we think of is, how are the police and the military going to use this against us?
Mm-hmm.
We don't think of, oh, this is a really cool, like, medicine delivery vehicle, or like, oh, this is going to help out with this thing, or, oh, this is going to make this aspect of life much easier. No, it's like, literally, how will this be used as a tool of oppression against the state, or by the state? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, where are the cameras on it?
Exactly.
That's
where are
my
the
first
cameras
thought.
on it? The whole surveillance aspect of it. You look at, the intersection of tech and law enforcement, for instance. Algorithmic policing, like, that's a thing. We have algorithms also in the carceral system determining whether or not and when somebody can be put on bail, like, or when somebody can be, eligible for parole and release. Like, there's an algorithm that calculates that. You look at the ways in which the surveillance state developed, particularly after 9/11, as it was being tested on Muslim communities in New York and New Jersey. And so it's that sort of thing where, the future is always happening to marginalized people before it happens to everyone else. And I think that dynamic is something that forces speculative fiction to exist in that liminal space between, the fantastical and the reality. The Watts chapter towards the end of the book, which is the only sort of near future chapter, is literally just an extrapolation of existing trends, like a couple years into the future. I don't think it's completely implausible that, we will have, I guess, less aesthetically intrusive ways of monitoring parolees and people on probation. Rather than ankle monitors, we'll have chips in their thumbs. It's the same sort of machinery, the same function. It's just it looks better, right? It doesn't look as intrusive, right?
Doesn't
And
look
so
like a manacle.
Exactly. And so I like that. I think is one of the dynamics at work, is when you have people from marginalized communities, they're bringing this experience of look, the future is already happening to us. It is happening to us. And what does that look like on the page?
Yeah, I think what Tochi said about being children and grandchildren of empires is really fascinating, and
Great phrase.
it certainly was a driving force with me for Empire City. For viewers unfamiliar with it, the mechanism for it is, it's an alternate history set in a world where America won, quote unquote, won the Vietnam War. So the myth of invincibility was allowed to endure and perpetuate. Our America's an empire, but this America's out and proud about being imperial in a way that we kind of play with. We pretend to be humble with in our reality. I was drawing on.
Okay, all right.
It was more kind of like an ancient Rome or High Britain model was what I was drawing from, and the reason for it was to kind of get back to Stephanie's point of us maybe accidentally willing things into existence. For 20 years, America's been abroad conducting these forever foreign wars, and only segments of our population have dealt with the consequences of it. Certainly, the Afghan and Iraqi communities have felt the repercussions of it on a much wider macro level. But if you wanted to avoid these wars over the last 20 years, if you were American, you could, and plenty of Americans have done so, and that's something our government has wanted, certainly. So eventually, though, you got to pay the piper. And something that I was thinking about as I was writing Empire City, set in an alternate world with its own forever wars that have been going on longer than ours, what does it look like when the war comes home? Because history shows us that the war always comes home. And I started writing this book in 2016. Of course, it then comes out, and one of the big scenes is a clash between federal agents, many of whom are military veterans, and left-wing political group of military veterans that feel like they need to fight back on the street. Well, that sounds a lot like what happened in Portland this summer, and I had more than one friend reach out and accuse me of creating this dystopian wormhole that we've all fallen into. But like Tochi and Nora, we're artists. Hopefully, if we're doing this well, it's because maybe we're anticipating some things that we see in culture and society that are happening, and we're trying to do our damnedest as artists to send out some forewarnings out there, right? I'll take between a creative artist and government hacks, I'll take the imagination and anticipatory nature of the artists every time. So when people talk about now how everything seems so Orwellian, it's not because Orwell made this be, or that the states read these books and said, oh, let's do this. It's just because he saw quicker and clearer more than most in his time and anticipated these things. And I suspect all of us in our own ways are trying to do something similar.
Yeah, I mean, in my case, I, like with Tochi's book, a lot of what I drew on for The City We Became were things that are actually happening. I moved into BedStuy maybe 3 years ago, and the first neighbor that I met is a wonderful woman who's lived here for like 30-something years. And she broke it down for me. She was like, be careful. There are people literally roving our neighborhood, trying to get your personal information so that they can steal your deed. And there's been a rampant problem in Bed-Stuy of deed theft. I mean, they don't really even need your personal information. They can just go to look at city records and use that as a means of kind of running one of several different really popular scams to try and get their hands on the property. And for those that don't know, Bed-Stuy in New York is a beautiful old neighborhood with lots of absolutely gorgeous old school brownstones. Brownstones are sort of an iconic building in New York, and they're increasingly valued as like sort of I don't even know what to call it. Historic landmark level architectural treasure. And most brownstones, lots of Black families in this neighborhood bought them years ago, have been holding on to them as like the one investment for their families that they can reliably pass down. But those brownstones are now worth $2-3 million. And of course, once that kind of money gets into the picture, then people start getting unscrupulous. And there have been a number of cases of particularly elderly people of color getting their property effectively stolen from them. And so this was the first conversation that I had when I moved to Bed-Stuy. And then like the second conversation I had was people talking about the Brownsville school riot. Not riot, but the Brownsville school strike, basically teacher strike, which was kind of an iconic reshaping of American education that started here. And this is life in New York. People, one of the criticisms that I've heard of The City We Became is that, I'm spending a lot of time talking or having the characters talk about social issues and struggles, and that's what people in New York are like. Maybe you don't see that on Friends because the characters on Friends didn't have to worry about deed theft, or they didn't have it on such a rampant level happening in their neighborhood that they could stress about that instead of the soup guy or whatever. I think that was Seinfeld. Anyway. So, if I'm writing things that suddenly feel really true, it's because I'm actually writing things that are true. So even when I'm trying to write fantasy, apparently.
I just want to note that we're at the 40-minute mark. So if you've been sitting on a question, you should definitely ask it. In the meantime, I see a number of people have wished Tochi a happy birthday, so I shall do the same.
Happy birthday.
Tochi!
Thank
For
you.
spending it on Zoom. What a
Wow.
yeah.
No, this is having this conversation is such an incredible privilege and birthday present. So
Aw.
the pleasure is mine.
Aw.
Oh,
Happy
that's
birthday.
lovely.
Thank you.
Well, let's see if any questions come in. But in the meantime, while
Leave
we're
my little
talking about
X-ray.
what
I don't know. Somehow this is a birthday gesture. Woo!
while we wait to see if any of our listeners, watchers, I don't know what you call somebody at a virtual panel, have any questions, why don't we toss this idea around and keep building? So everybody wants to know, is New York dead? What's going to happen next to New York? What's coming for New York? Somebody whose job depends very heavily on the city budget, I have this conversation all the time. So what do you see? Since you guys have this artist's vision, you guys are writing into the future in many ways. What do you see for New York?
New York is not dead. There's a combination of things happening. New York is going through a massive upheaval at this point because it costs too fucking much to live here. Oh, what was this? I don't know if I was supposed to say the F-bomb, but anyway, so be it. Anyway, it costs too much to live here. The rent is too damn high, and we are in the middle of an economic contraction because, like sensible polities have done all over the world, our local government prioritized human lives over the economy in dealing with the coronavirus. And fortunately, that meant that our numbers have dropped a great deal. The city is slowly and cautiously starting to reopen, but it also means that we are probably in a recession, or if not a depression. And that's fine because it means that a lot fewer people died than could have. And I accept that as the price of being in this city. And, New York's been through this before. When I was a kid, growing up here in the 80s, the city was damn near bankrupt. It was just rough. Life was rough. But on the other hand, the culture adapted. The city was very much alive. In fact, some of the most powerful manifestations of New Yorkness came out of that time of strife and struggle. And so, what's happening right now is that a lot of the people who came here during the good times are freaked out and are probably leaving. And I'm like, fine, deuces. But if the core of New York remains solid, which so far it does, then New York will be absolutely fine. We will see some new art forms emerge. We will see a lot of survival techniques and practices begin here and probably spread elsewhere, because that's what's happened every time in the future this has occurred. And New York will be just fine. I think the bigger danger to New York is if things don't change, if the rental and housing prices remain high during this depression, if the people who came in and caused a lot of the struggle that we're dealing with right now don't go, I'm not sure New York will survive that. So.
Yeah, I really well said. Much like America, I think part of what makes New York so wonderful and beautiful is the constant change, right? The new blood coming from all over the world every year to bring their own ideas and energy and spirit to add to what is already here. I'm not a New York native. I'm from Reno, Nevada originally, and I'm a father of a toddler. So I'd be lying if sometimes during the past couple of months, I've wondered, is it time? Is it getting is it too much? But I married a New Yorker, and she's so proud and loves this city that she feels it with me during those moments. And I was talking to my father-in-law the other day, who's also a New York native, and he was saying the same thing that Nora just said, that actually, Matt, like this what a great time to be an artist or a writer in New York. And he was talking about, when people talk about New York in the 70s as this really dark dystopian place, I loved it. Because everybody that was there wanted to be there and could be there, could afford to be there, and be who they wanted to be. It wasn't not everything was owned and operated by Apple or Amazon, right? Which would be a true dystopia, I think. So you know, I think there's real opportunity on the horizon, and new stories and new waves of people, young, middle-aged, and old, are going to come here as a result, and add to this crazy miscellany of New York that you know makes it. I'm with Stephanie. That makes it the world's greatest city.
Yeah, I mean, the blackout gave us hip hop. There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
The
What do you
city has always chosen its people.
Yes.
like,
I think-
and the commenters do seem to agree with you, by the way. So everybody's on board with you guys. Yeah, the one constant is change. Dead for who?
Exactly.
I like that.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is coming, Tochi?
Oh man, I mean, whenever I see those really sort of off base articles or headlines about, you know, New York is dead, or, you know, the city is over, or whatever, you know, I always think of the people who are leaving, and in many times, in many instances, the Venn diagram of the people who are leaving and the people who screwed things up is a circle. So, you know, like Nora said, deuces, right? Because the people who stay, like, that to me is more endemic of New York and New Yorkness than, like, you know, what in my mind seem like interlopers who come in because they have an image that they fashioned in their minds of New York, what they think it is, and they try to basically turn it into the place that they want it to be, as opposed to the place that it already is. And when it resists their efforts, you know, they're like, okay, I'm done with this. And, you know, so I think often the city is better for their departure. And so I think the people, it's funny, the people who are most affected by this change, I feel, are the people that are least inclined, and in many instances least able to leave. Like, they literally have to stay. They have to stay. And like the city, like you can't get rid of them. You can't like expel them. The city is always going to, they are always going to be there, which means the city is always going to be there. You know, the 70s were a rough time in New York for a lot of people and forced a lot of people to leave, but the people who stayed gave us hip hop, right? Like, I feel like it's that sort of thing. And so that's what gives me hope for the city and its continued sort of thriving. It's like, you know, like Jesus and Mero, like, they're not a product of Manhattan. They're not a product of Midtown. They're not a product of skyscrapers and whatnot. They're a product of the Bronx. They're a product of the bodega, right? And I feel like we're going to see, you know, much more of that, of a celebration of that, or at least that's my hope. We see a much more of a celebration of that, you know, traditions like, you know, the steel drums in preparation for Carnival, like that sort of thing. Like, that to me is New York. And I feel like with the rest of the stuff, the glass and the you know, the premium on air sort of stripped away, we get to see and pay more attention to and celebrate that.
Well, that's a great way to end this panel. Thank you, Tochi, for bringing it home so beautifully. I want to thank all three of the panelists. This is for just an amazing conversation, and remind everybody who's watching at home that you can buy these books at this link below me that says buy books. It's very clear. It says buy books. Click on that and buy the books. Or as a city librarian, I must remind you, you can also borrow these books from your local library in print or ebook or e-audio, all sorts of different formats. And you can get a library card online. September, which just ended, was library card sign up month, but you can sign up for a library card any time of the year. So don't forget to get a library card if you don't want to buy the books. But I do want you to read all of these books. Please read these books and read them together. They're in a beautiful conversation with each other. I feel like reading each of your books was such a powerful experience in and of itself, but these three books together really had a very interesting conversation amongst themselves, much like the conversation here today. So thank you. And thank you so much for all the thoughtful commentary from folks. no questions, but really great thoughts. So I really appreciate people being able to share their own New York experiences alongside of the conversation today. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the Brooklyn Book Festival. Try to get out and enjoy some of the beautiful Brooklyn Day today, too, if you can, and you're here in New York.
And wear a mask.
Yeah, and wear a mask for the love of Pete. Wherever you are, whether you're in Brooklyn, I don't care where you're, wear the mask. When you open the door, wear the mask. Great. Thank you, everybody.
Happy birthday, Tochi.
Happy birthday.
Happy
Tochi.
birthday.
Thank you. Thank you so much.